One man. One decision. 300 million people would never know his name. But every single one of them is alive today because of what he did in the dark, alone, underwater, terrified. Here's what they don't teach you in school. You've heard of the Cuban Missile Crisis. 13 days, Kennedy versus Khrushchev, the Cold War's most dangerous moment. But here's the thing. The history books got the story wrong. Or, not wrong exactly, just incomplete. Because the moment that actually saved the world, it didn't happen in the White House. It didn't happen in the Kremlin. It happened inside a submarine, in complete darkness, 400 feet underwater, with no radio contact, no orders from Moscow, no way to know if World War III had already started. And one exhausted, seasick Soviet naval officer was holding a key, the key that launched nuclear torpedoes, and he was seconds away from turning it. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will never think about the word luck the same way again. I'm going to tell you the full story today, not the sanitized textbook version, the real version, with the real people, their real fears, their real mistakes. You're going to meet a Soviet officer who defied direct orders and probably saved your life. You're going to meet an American spy pilot who saw something he wasn't supposed to see and started a countdown no one knew how to stop. You're going to sit inside the room where the most powerful men on Earth argued, cried, and begged each other not to end civilization. And you're going to understand something about human nature, about fear, ego, and luck, that is absolutely relevant to the world you're living in right now. This isn't just history. This is a story about how close everything can get to falling apart, and the one thing that always pulls it back. Let's go back to the beginning. Two superpowers, both with enough nuclear weapons to kill every human being on Earth several times over. Both absolutely convinced the other one was evil. Both absolutely terrified of the other one's next move. This is the Cold War. And if you want to understand it in 30 seconds, imagine two men holding guns to each other's heads. Neither one wants to shoot, but neither one wants to put the gun down first. That's it. That's the whole thing. Now, on one side, you have America. John F. Kennedy, 43 years old, the youngest president in American history. Brilliant, charming, and secretly, absolutely secretly, convinced that he looks weak to the Soviets. Why? Because 1 year earlier, he authorized a catastrophic invasion of Cuba. It failed embarrassingly, publicly. The whole world watched, Khrushchev watched, and Kennedy knew it. On the other side, Nikita Khrushchev, former peasant, bare-knuckle political survivor. A man who once said, and I want you to really hear this, if you live among wolves, you must act like a wolf. Khrushchev saw Kennedy's failure at Cuba, and he made a decision. He was going to test this young American president hard. And so, quietly, secretly, in the dead of night, Soviet ships began sailing toward Cuba, loaded with something that had never been placed this close to American soil before. Nuclear missiles, enough to destroy every major American city within minutes of launch. Now the question is, how long before America finds out? His name was Richard Hazer, Air Force pilot, and on a Tuesday morning, he was flying a U-2 spy plane, essentially a camera with wings, over western Cuba at 70,000 feet. He almost didn't go. The mission had been delayed. Weather, bureaucracy, the usual. But that morning, the skies cleared, and Hazer pointed his plane south and started clicking. He didn't know what he was photographing. That wasn't his job. His job was to fly. Stay level, don't die. The photographs went to analysts in Washington. And when those analysts put the images under their magnifying glasses and started measuring shadows and angles and distances between equipment, one of them went pale. Then he picked up the phone. The photographs showed Soviet medium-range ballistic missile sites under construction in Cuba. Range, 1,200 miles. Washington, D.C., 1,100 miles away. The missiles weren't operational yet, but they would be. In days. The clock had started. Nobody had pressed start, but it was running. Now here's what Kennedy does when he finds out. And this is the part that most people don't know. because what he does is genuinely, surprisingly human. It's 8:45 in the morning. Kennedy's national security advisor, McGeorge Bundy, walks into his bedroom. The President of the United States is still in his pajamas, and Bundy tells him, by every account of people in that room, Kennedy's face does something to Khrushchev. Cuba wasn't aggression. It was balance. He genuinely believed he was correcting an unfair situation. He later wrote, and I find this extraordinary, that he wanted Americans to feel what it feels like to have enemy missiles aimed at you. Not because he wanted war, because he thought that mutual fear was the only thing that could create mutual respect. He was, in his own brutal logic, trying to build peace. Whether you think he was right or wrong, and there are serious arguments both ways, that context matters. Because it means we didn't have a madman with his finger on the button. We had two frightened, rational men, each trying to protect their country, each completely unable to trust the other one. That combination, rational actors who can't communicate clearly, turns out to be far more dangerous than madness. And we're about to see exactly why. Okay, 10 minutes in, let me tell you what's about to happen. Kennedy is going to make a decision that shocks his own military. Khrushchev is going to send two letters, one calm, one terrifying, and nobody in Washington will know which one to believe. And then, deep under the Atlantic Ocean, a Soviet submarine is going to lose contact with Moscow. and the captain is going to think World War III has already started. The next 15 minutes of this story are the most insane 15 minutes in modern history. Keep watching. Kennedy chooses the blockade. He calls it a quarantine because legally, a blockade is an act of war. The language matters. Every word in a nuclear standoff is a loaded gun. He goes on television, October 22nd, prime time, and 100 million Americans watch their young president look directly into the camera and say the words nobody wanted to hear. It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union. Full retaliatory response. Nobody had to translate that. Across America, families did what families do. With a warhead roughly equivalent in power to the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. If Captain Savitsky launches it, if he takes out that American destroyer, the American response would be immediate. Soviet response. American response. Escalation within hours. The war that 45 years of Cold War had tried to prevent would begin in the Atlantic Ocean, because one exhausted man in a steel tube couldn't get a radio signal. Now remember, I told you at the start that one man saved the world. We're getting to him. But first, I have to tell you about the two letters, because what's happening in Washington right now is just as insane. Two letters from Khrushchev arrive in Washington on the same day. Same man, same day. Completely different messages. One is desperate, emotional, almost poetic, and it offers a way out. The other one is cold, hard, and reads like an ultimatum. Which one does Kennedy respond to? And why does the answer to that question tell us everything about how nuclear war is actually avoided? Right after I tell you what happens on that submarine, because we cannot leave those men underwater any longer. Here is how nuclear weapons work on a Soviet submarine. To launch a nuclear torpedo, you need authorization from 3 officers: the captain, the political officer, and the chief of staff of the submarine brigade. Captain Savitsky wants to launch. He is shaking with fear and rage and exhaustion. The political officer agrees. 2 out of 3. The third man, the one who has to say yes, is a 34-year-old officer named Vasily Alexandrovich Arkhipov. And Vasily Arkhipov says no. Think about what this moment costs him. He is defying his commanding officer in a crisis on a Soviet military vessel in 1962, when defying orders could mean imprisonment, disgrace, execution. Captain Savitsky is screaming at him. Colleagues are pleading with him. The hull is shaking from American depth charges. And Vasily Arkhipov stands in that hot, dark, fighter jets scramble with air-to-air missiles. For 20 minutes, armed American and Soviet jets are in the same airspace. Nobody fires, but nobody knew they wouldn't. Same day, Cuba. A different U-2 is shot down by a Soviet surface-to-air missile. The pilot, Major Rudolf Anderson, is killed. American military commanders immediately request authorization to retaliate, destroy the missile site, now. Kennedy says no. His military is furious. They think he's weak. LeMay literally calls him out. Says the Soviets are making the Americans look like they have no spine. Kennedy holds, and later, much later, we find out something that reframes everything. That order to shoot down the U-2? Khrushchev didn't give it. A Soviet general in Cuba gave it, on his own authority, without Moscow's permission, which means on Saturday, two separate military decisions, one American, one Soviet, almost triggered a war that neither government wanted. That is terrifying. Not because of evil, not because of madness, because of fog. On Sunday morning, Kennedy sends his response to Khrushchev's first letter. He accepts the terms: no invasion of Cuba, end the blockade, remove the missiles. And then, through a secret back channel, through a Soviet diplomat meeting with Bobby Kennedy in a Washington restaurant, a private additional message is delivered. The American missiles in Turkey will be quietly removed, in a few months, with no public announcement, no acknowledgement that it was part of the deal, because both men understand that peace sometimes requires the other side to have a story they can tell at home. October 28, 1962. Khrushchev goes on Soviet radio and announces this: the missiles will be removed from Cuba. Kennedy releases a statement welcoming Khrushchev's statesmanship. The Soviet ships that had stopped in the water turn around. The American military stands down. And somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, the Soviet submarine, with burst eardrum sailors and a man named Vasily Arkhipov, heads home. Nobody declares victory. Nobody holds a parade. The world just continues. And most of the people in it have absolutely no idea how close it came. Here is what I think about every single time I revisit this story. The world was not saved by weapons. It was not saved by strength. It was saved by three things that we almost never talk about in history class. The first one is restraint. Kennedy defied his own generals over and over. Every military instinct said attack. He chose the slower, harder, uncertain path, the one that kept talking alive. Restraint, in that moment, was an act of courage. The second one is imagination. Bobby Kennedy's idea, ignore the second letter, respond to the first, is not a military strategy. It's creative thinking. It's the ability to see an option that isn't on any official list. In the most dangerous 2 weeks of modern history, what saved us was someone thinking differently. And the third one is Vasily Arkhipov. One person, saying no, in the dark, under pressure, without any guarantee that he was right. We think of history as being made by presidents and generals, by movements and armies. But sometimes, the most important decision in the history of the world is made by one tired man in a submarine, who just decides that he needs more information before he ends everything. The Cuban Missile Crisis tells us that catastrophe is not inevitable. It tells us that even in the worst moments, with the worst stakes, on the worst day, there is usually a Vasily somewhere. The question is whether we let him speak. After the crisis ended, Kennedy and Khrushchev did something remarkable. They built a direct hotline between Washington and Moscow, the famous red telephone. Because they had learned the hard way, at the cost of 13 of the most terrifying days in human history, that the most dangerous thing in the world is not an enemy, it's silence between enemies. Communication, direct, honest, even uncomfortable. That was the lesson. I'd love to keep that conversation going with you. If this story hit different than you expected, if you found yourself thinking about Arkhipov, or about Bobby's letter idea, or about LeMay screaming at Kennedy, tell me in the comments. Tell me the moment that got you. And if you want to go deeper, I've got a video on the Berlin crisis, where Kennedy and Khrushchev first sized each other up. And another one on the man who really controlled Cuba during all of this. Because Fidel Castro's role in the missile crisis is a story that almost nobody tells, and it will completely change how you see everything we just covered. Links are below. I'll see you in the next one. And hey, next time you see a sunset, Vasily Arkhipov earned that for you.